This is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane Pittman and Olgun Ulrich back from our FIBA break as well, if that's what it was. I'm not too sure. And hey, Olgs, if before that break people kept on diving for the record books, then they needed to do it again on the weekend because of a ridiculous performance from Bryce Cotton. We're also going to talk Tassie and Adelaide, and what does it mean for the top six? Are we going to have a change before the end of the season? The Phoenix also picking up a big win against Illawarra, and plenty to talk to from this Melbourne and Sydney game as well. Chris Goulding on fire. As always, catch up on all the news that Olgun's got on ESPN.com.au and watch Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops on Thursday night on ESPN as well. Olgun will be there, Ryan will be there, and DJ Vasiljevic will be there this week. It has been a fascinating 2 weeks for the Adelaide 36ers, so I can't wait to chat to DJ. So check all that out. Hey, Olgs, at least this wasn't a scoring outburst in Melbourne or an incident in Melbourne that you missed out on. So that's the positive. You weren't going to be in Perth for this Bryce Cotton explosion.
You know what? There was still a fun game in Melbourne, so I did miss out on that. But I did get to Tacko Fall's NBL debut in Illawarra, so like I got my in-person NBL fix. Man, it's been an interesting week, and during to start a season, I don't look at the ladder. It's just for me, it's not too important. But I looked at it today. And there's some separation where we're seeing something. We're seeing Melbourne at the top creating some separation. We're seeing some of the teams at the bottom. Cairns is on that 9-game skid. Brisbane is looking a bit iffy. And then you got those teams in the middle who, and there's no telling who's going to be where. Illawarra maybe looks like the best of that bunch, but Perth looks good. Sydney is still sort of interesting. Tassie's on a 3-game winning streak. So that those teams in the middle, they're very, very intriguing to me, and I have no idea who's going to make that. Some teams who we're going to be in the same situation. Some teams who should be in the top 6 are just going to fall out of it.
So as of the morning of December 3, I'm putting a line through Brisbane and Cairns. Apologies to our friends in Queensland, but it doesn't look like those teams are going to turn it around. Brisbane had a few moments over the last few weeks, but it just feels like, for a number of reasons for both teams, where there was injuries, certainly with the Cairns Taipans, it's been a sad story of the season. It feels like it's going to be hard to catch that up, particularly because it is so competitive. Even with those teams, it doesn't really feel like there's any gimme games. We know Adelaide, undermanned Adelaide this week, is going to play Brisbane. That's a dangerous game. But those two teams at the bottom feel like they're out of it. And it does feel like Tasmania and the Phoenix are the teams that could potentially move into the 6. And if there is going to be a team that's going to move into the 6, we discussed it last week, but where does New Zealand fit now? You're 7-3. You make this import change. You get absolutely blown out by the Illawarra Hawks, and then you witness to the greatest scoring performance in the 40-minute era. So let's just get straight into Bryce Cotton, but New Zealand 7-5. I want to ask you about them a little bit later on. For Bryce, the thing that I love about this, and everyone does different rankings, and I always laugh at the idea that people get motivated or people get angry by these rankings because it's just, whatever. People are subjective, and if you're asking someone who is the best player in the league, Bryce Cotton has been 1 or 2 for the last 6 years. But this year he's missed a whole bunch of games. But I would bet that doesn't stop him from being annoyed if he's outside of that top 2, which we did see from our friend Derek Rucker over the last couple of weeks. We also saw Chris Goulding score 46 points. Then we saw James Bateman score 51. And people saying, geez, Bryce Cotton is in a little bit of a slump. Well, he put pay to those conversations very, very quickly in this game. And I reckon there was a bit of a, hey, everyone, don't forget, I'm still the best player in this league, and this is what I can do.
Yeah, there's got to be a sense of, if you're Bryce, like, what more do I have to do? Like, he was injured for a period of time. When he came back, he dropped, I think, a 30-piece, and then he had a down game because he's been injured for a period of time. That is not unreasonable stuff. This performance was one of the most incredible performances I've ever seen. Now, I think it should be noted that the resistance from the New Zealand Breakers wasn't outstanding, especially with Tacko forward there, playing in that deep, deep drops, and that's just not going to work against Bryce Cotton. He's the drops killer in the NBL over the past few seasons. But the efficiency that Bryce Cotton did this at, I looked at one point, he was 9 of 9 on twos. I think he finished 10 of 11 or 11 of 12 on 2-pointers. He got to the line 17 times. He had 59 points in 28 field goal attempts. It's the fewest amount of field goal attempts anyone who scored 55 points or more has ever had in the NBL. He did it in a multitude of ways. It was getting on the rim. It was taking contact and finishing around the paint. It was the pull-up threes. And I felt bad for Petri Koppinen because you have this elite point guard in front of you in Parker Jackson Cartwright who's playing unbelievably well. That was one of the best games of the season from any player, from Parker Jackson Cartwright, and it was just absolute brilliance on the other end. And I think it was a lot of don't forget about me. This is like I appreciate I've been injured for a bit, and when you're injured for a bit and you're out of like the public conscience and you're out of the discourse, you can be forgotten. But we can't forget about Bryce Cotton. It's Bryce Cotton.
Yeah, I saw a few tweets and a few conversations online across the weekend about the old line of don't take Bryce Cotton for granted. But it does make sense because we don't know what's going to be going on next year. I think people are pretty aware that there are other opportunities overseas that teams would love to have this guy. He's done everything he could for the Perth Wildcats to this point in time. And a few weeks ago on the podcast, when he did come back and have that first scoring outburst, that's why I was laughing at the idea of, gee, Perth moving the ball a little bit without Bryce Cotton. Maybe they're better. No, they're not better. This is ridiculous. They are not a better team without Bryce Cotton because the reality is the rest of the players on the team are unreliable, and you have this guy that night in, night out could do it. But the thing that was different, I would love to see the stats, and I didn't. If I had hours free, I could have gone through every single play-by-play to check it out. But he is sometimes a guy that is a slow starter. Like I would like to see his quarter-by-quarter averages, but I would bet that his first quarter scoring average is the lowest out of all four. It does feel like he can get to quarter time and he'll either be scoreless or we have 2 points, 3 points, and then he'll start to heat up. But he went absolutely ballistic from the start of this game. And here's the one thing I would say, because yes, there was some open layups and I don't think there was much resistance when he got downhill, but some of the degree of difficulty outside shots in this game with guys draped over him, with either shooting off the dribble, shooting around screens, give and go and picking up dribble handoffs and shooting on the move. I mean, this was some incredible shot making, similar to what we've seen, obviously, from Chris Goulding here over the last month as well.
Yeah, so I went on our YouTube channel, ESPN Australia's YouTube channel, and they have the highlights of this 59-point game. And I'm pretty sure the first points is at maybe like the 4 or 5 minute mark in the first quarter. So this isn't someone who's coming out in the first 2 minutes and who's jacking up shots. One thing that has frustrated me, it happened both times this round. Brisbane against Bryce Cotton. They're doing a reasonable job on him. And then all of a sudden, midway through the first quarter, they drop into a zone. And this looked like a team that had not practiced a zone. I think one of the commentators said it on the broadcast. And the ball goes from side to side. It gets to Bryce Cotton on the right wing. He's relatively open. He hits a shot. The next possession down the floor, he hits a pull-up three, forcing a timeout from Brisbane. So it's like, why are you letting him see the ball go in the basket? The same thing happened against New Zealand. You got Tacko falling this deep drops. Bryce Cotton comes off either a handoff or a ball screen, and he's got a wide open look. And it's like, why are you giving him opportunities to see the ball go in? Because you know that this is someone who he's seeking a heater. He is looking for these opportunities to get bucket after bucket. And if you give him the first one for free, basically, then you're digging your own grave at that point.
So if we look, because I've said, to me, I know what you're going to get from Bryce Cotton. We've seen Almanza have really nice moments. We've seen Ben Henschel be an impactful player. It still feels like Keanu Pinder, if he can come back and be the difference for this team, they can be really competitive at the top end. But if we do look on the other side of the floor, so I think the Perth Wildcats defense would be so happy that one of their own players had a scoring outburst, so we can't keep saying that these guys are going off against the Perth Wildcats. But you did mention it. Parker Jackson Cartwright had 34 points on 11 for 15 shooting in this game. So again, this defense has been unable to slow down a scoring guard. Now, 34 points isn't 46, it's not 51, but that is incredibly efficient. 34 points on 15 shots. And this was an up-tempo game. Teams were running up and down the floor. There wasn't a lot of defense across the board, but they're still going to have to be better defensively because you give up over 110 points in this game. You're normally not winning unless you have someone go off for a record-breaking performance.
Yeah, we said it last week. There's no resistance from this Wildcats team, unfortunately, because they're just not built that way. Now, no Ty Webster in this game. He is probably their best perimeter defender outside of what Dylan Windler's supposed to be. The thing is, over the past few weeks, let's say over the past 4 or 5 weeks, they've had far and away the best offense, even better than Illawarra, just over the past several weeks. It feels a lot like the Perth Wildcats of a few years ago, that the Brady Manic Wildcats, where it's like, all right, we're just going to outscore you, and we're going to be a high potency offensive team. Does that win in the NBL? Could that historically? No. Historically, you have to be a top 3 defense to win the NBL. But is this the year where it's a little bit funky? I don't think any team is like absolutely outstanding. Maybe this is the year where a super high potency offensive team can just go through a playoff series and win a championship. I don't think that's the case. I still think this is a league that a team has to hold their hat on the defensive end if they're going to go far in a postseason. But it seems like they almost have no choice but to lead into that play style because of the personnel that they have. I assume they thought that Dylan Windler would be more effective defensively, especially on the perimeter, and that maybe they'd get something out of Christian Doolittle. But Christian Doolittle probably has to be a bit more resigned to doing his stuff in and around the paint because of how ineffective Keanu Pinder has been at times, and the fact that there is inconsistency in that spot. So I think they're going all-out offense. Will that work? History says no. But at the very least right now, especially at home, they're very, very fun to watch.
Yeah, they used to bristle in press conferences when the team would come out to Melbourne and we'd be at those games, and they weren't happy with the questioning about the defense, and they found out later on that, no, you can't just outscore every team. And I would say, I'm not saying that there aren't significant question marks over the Sydney Kings, the team who gave up 65 points in the first half to Melbourne, but they have been a pretty solid defense. The best team in the league is Melbourne United, and they play defense. Illawarra, I'll keep on saying it, they're hot and cold. I don't think they're a bad defensive team. I think they're a bad consistency with effort team. And then you have Adelaide and Perth. They're just trying to outscore teams. So we'll see how that all plays out. I wouldn't say that I like the chances of the Perth Wildcats if they keep playing defense the way they're playing right now. New Zealand, though, what is going on with Tacko Fall? I know you mentioned him a couple of times. It looked like he was injured late in that game, and it's maybe not fair to pin this all on him, but we discussed this. Everyone discussed this. This team a few weeks ago, I said on the podcast, I don't think that necessarily they're going to win the title, but I think I know what I'm getting from this New Zealand team. They play hard, they do scrap on defense, and they've got athletes and they can get up and down the floor. And as soon as you put this guy on the floor, you are no longer a team that I feel confident that has athletes that can get up and down the floor. You've changed the way this team can play. You're limited defensively, and they lose both games. And now this week, they've got Melbourne and Sydney coming up. So they could turn it around, and they could win one of those games. I don't know if Tacko Fall is going to be available to play. You might be able to tell us here in just a second. But if you go from 7-3 to 7-7 after making this move, people are going to come for you, and they are going to be criticized for making that, particularly as you reported, if the locker room wasn't necessarily happy with the change.
Yeah, as of now, I had no idea about what Tacko's injury is. It seemed like a knee thing. He went off, couldn't get back on. I'm more concerned about not just Tacko's injury in a vacuum, but Tacko and Dan Pinner going down at the same time. Yeah. Because all of a sudden, they've gone from Freddie Gillespie and Sam Menenga as their two bigs, which I think is really, really impressive, to just Sam Menenga. That's a little bit scary. Justin Tatum said something interesting in his press conference after the Hawks Breakers game, which was, we became distracted by Tacko Fall. And I think both teams are getting distracted by it. And it's not because he's big, right? And, I would implore everyone around the NBL community to stop treating Tacko Fall like a cartoon, right? Let's judge him based on his merits as a basketball player. I understand it is triggering at first when you see someone like that, because he is abnormally tall relative to everyone else, even in basketball. But as a basketball player, you watch him and you watch what happens on the floor, and everyone fixates on him. So everyone on the Illawarra Hawks in that first game either didn't want to attack the rim because he had 3 block shots in basically 3 straight possessions, or it became a challenge where we're just going to go right at him. But you have to treat it like a normal basketball game. You have to understand what they're trying to do with Tacko Fall on the floor schematically, and you have to work around that. The same thing goes for the Breakers. When he's on the floor, it feels like they feel an obligation to throw it down to him. They're trying to use his height as someone who's going to get the ball down low. If they're going to front him in the post, throw it over, and he'll have an open dunk. I don't know if that's the best way to use him in this league, because their team's just going to pack the paint, get him out of there. The officiating in this league is inconsistent, so they don't know how to officiate Tacko Fall. For all they know, they're watching this really big guy whose arms are flailing because he's getting grabbed, and they're going to call it against Tacko Fall. So you can't rely on that. I'm surprised they haven't used him way more as a screener. He comes in at 140 kilos. He is a wide human being. Use him as a screener for one of the best on-ball players in the league. I think everyone's just getting distracted by him and feeling an obligation to either use him or go at him, when I think you just have to, if you're the Breakers, zone in on what he's really unique at, which is, being really big as a rim protector. He covers so much ground. And if you're the opposing team, get him in on balls. If they're in at deep drops, go at that. Like, it just seems like everyone's getting blindsided by the cartoonish nature of it, as opposed to just attacking from a basketball perspective.
It was a tough weekend across the board. And to your point off the top there, we are often, myself very much included, you're quick to jump to what you think is going to happen. It was only 2 games, and they played, as I said, a pretty damn good Illawarra team, in my opinion, at home as well. And then you go on the road to Perth, which is challenging, and you have Bryce Cotton do what he did. So maybe New Zealand can bounce back, but as I said, a really tough double coming up this weekend. Let's now go to Built Different, presented by PointsBet, and Bryce Cotton might feel harshly done by here, but we are going to talk about Chris Goulding, big picture, Olgun. He went off again, particularly in the first half of this game against Sydney, and over his last 6 games, including the 2 FIBA qualification games, he has 42 3-point makes. He joined Leonard Copeland on the all-time list with 1,242 made threes in the NBL. He's been a star of this league for over a decade, and we discussed it all last season and said that might have been a career best season. He's been even better this year. Is it possible that his last 2 years have been the best in his career when he's in his mid-30s?
It's crazy. I think it is. The production is at an all-time high for Chris Goulding. The efficiency is extremely impressive. One of the most annoying things was watching this Sydney-Melbourne game and understanding that Chris Goulding enters this game on this month-long heater. And the first possession of the game, Matthew Dellavedova has it at the top of the key. He's got a post entry to Rob Lowe that he's trying to throw. And Bull Kuo, who's on the strong side corner with Chris Goulding, helps off to try to steal a post entry to Rob Lowe that was being defended relatively well, leaves the hottest man in Australian basketball open for a corner 3. And that was the end for that first quarter. Chris ended up having 6 threes in that game. Every shot he takes looks like it's going in, no matter whether it's contested, no matter whether it's not. He is on an all-time heater right now. He's one of the most informed shooters in world basketball right now. I don't think it's crazy to say that. And the fact that he's doing it at this age where he's lost a little bit of pop, the efficiency is incredible. The production lately is incredible. Man, hats off to Chris Goulding.
Yeah, attention to detail has to be at an absolute premium against this guy. Same with Bryce Cotton. And the beautiful thing about this is Andrew Gaze has been on the call and courtside watching this happen and listening to the great man be as amazed as he is by what Chris Goulding has been doing. Has been a lot of fun. But that is Chris Goulding, and that was PointsBet, built different.
What are you really gambling with? For free and confidential support, call the number on the screen or visit the website.
All right,
let me echo that praise for Andrew Gaze, because some of the lists that we're seeing, Chris Goulding is climbing those lists, and Andrew Gaze is in Wilt territory at the top of them. But the humility that he approaches these broadcasts with, whether he's talking about Chris Goulding or Bryce Cotton or whomever, I appreciate that very much. There can be a string of old heads who will never let the current guys shine. I'm not saying anyone does that currently, but that can be something that can happen. But it's not now. And I think Andrew Gaze being one of part of the A team of NBL commentary, he's still the voice of Australian basketball. I think for him to have such humility when he calls these games, when he commentates these games and talks about them, I appreciate that very, very much.
Well, he does it from a position of comfort, because when you look at that all-time 3-point makes list, he's still about 600 ahead of him, and he did this in the bloody 80s and 90s. The guy is just a maniac. Obviously, I was a little bit young to see prime Gazy. I remember as a kid, the other games, they were on Channel 10. Him and Copes was sort of the 96, 97, 98, around there when I started watching them. And obviously the Tigers in their heyday at that point in time. But I mean, just the numbers from what Gazy was doing from outside the 3-point line doesn't even make sense. He was averaging more 3-point attempts per game than NBA teams were in total at that point in time. So he was ahead of the game, a ridiculous shooter. But yeah, it's fun to listen to him talk about Chris Goulding. I was going to say it, and then you cut me off, but this is the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast. Kane Pittman and Olgun Hulich. Make sure you go to espn.com.au for all the latest news. Check out Nothing But Net Aussie Hoops on Thursday night on ESPN. Most of the time it's on YouTube after, so hit us up on the social pages and give us your feedback on the show and get involved, because it's been a lot of fun doing this right throughout the season. It's only going to get better from here. And as I said, DJ Vasiljevic this week, and we've got plenty to discuss. This Melbourne-Sydney game in general, so I mentioned we've discussed this Sydney defense, and last week on the podcast, or it might have been the weekend before, if you remember, we were discussing the fact that by defensive rating, technically they were the number one defense in the league, but it didn't really feel like watching this team that they were a dominant defense. Then they give up 65 points to Melbourne in the first half. Now, they did clamp down on things and get better in the second half, but you already mentioned some of the threes, particularly that one where Bull Qual was helped and then was late to the closeout. And I started noting down how Chris Goulding was getting his threes. The second three was on a screen dribble handoff where there was a miscommunication. All of a sudden, he's wide open from the left wing, knocks it down. But then there was also other moments where I thought that he was well defended. There was one time in the second quarter where Cam Oliver comes up to the level of the screen. He cuts off and denies the first shot. So Chris Goulding has to get rid of the ball. So he passes it to Kyle Bowen, I believe it was, and then immediately gets the handoff. And then there's a little bit of miscommunication, and then he knocks it down. So I've been questioning myself because we've looked at these scoring outbursts, and we talk about the defense. And then I'm like, maybe I should just be tipping my hat more to how damn hard this guy is to move. Because when I watch Chris Goulding and when I watch Bryce Cotton, their ability to move without the ball at speed, even if you say Chris Goulding is not the Usain Bolt, he moves without the ball incredibly well. He makes quick decisions. And then as soon as he gets the catch, he can take the shot. So part of it is like, yes, you want to be on point defensively, but the other part is that these guys are just so difficult to defend and you don't necessarily know where they're going to go next, and they get the shot off before you're in a position. So I agree with you. I was very concerned for the Sydney defense with the way the first 6 or 7 minutes of this game went.
Yeah, the United is probably the most unforgiving team in the league right now, where if you give them any opening, if you give them any opportunity for an advantage, they will take it. And a lot of that credit obviously goes to Chris Goulding and his ability to make shots, because any sliver of an opening is a decent look for Chris Goulding. But it's on Shea Ely, it's on Matthew Dellavedova, it's on Rob Lowe, it's on Marcus Lee, it's on Kyle Bowen, it's on Jack White. All these guys know how to get this guy open, whether it's setting like a back pick or a dribble handoff. You know, I've said this before, but when Shea Ely has a mismatch in front of him, when he's got a big in front of him, the inclination is that this guy's going to try and take you off the dribble. He's going to pretend to take you off the dribble. He's going to find Chris Goulding for a dribble handoff because that big is sagging down low. So these are just guys who know how to play alongside Chris Goulding. They've played together for such a long time. These are elite basketball players. So again, if you give them an advantage, they will take it. And in that first half, it wasn't just giving them an advantage. There were defensive breakdowns from the Sydney Kings, which they largely cleaned up in the second half. So credit to them for that. Gorge opened his press conference by talking about the schedule. And I've been around Sydney Kings practices. He's brought up the schedule before. He does not appreciate that the Sydney Kings have had a lot of, Friday, Sunday games where it's Friday on the road and then returning to a game for a Sunday afternoon. And for them, I don't think it's necessarily about the travel, even though he has mentioned some fatigue things. For him, it's more about a preparation thing. For me, it's more. He mentioned that they spent the entire week focusing on Cairns, and then they had a small sliver of time to focus on United. I don't think you need a significant film session to understand that, hey, maybe don't help strong side of Chris Goulding, or however we're guarding ball screens, don't leave Chris Goulding open for three. Like that feels like something that you probably don't need a significant amount of time to talk over before you go into a United game. I do appreciate that it is very difficult to constantly play those Friday, Sunday games or those Thursday, Saturday games, especially on the road. But I think the flip side of that is this team is 8-7 right now, and they have a pretty significant home stretch coming up. So to survive, I'll use the word survive in mad air quotes, to survive that sort of schedule, entering what I think is a more palatable part of your schedule, to be 8-7 is not is a pretty reasonable place to be.
So I can't speak to, because I'm always wary of this, because my first reaction when you say that is, come on, Gorge. Everyone's doing it. New Zealand went from Illawarra to Perth across the weekend. Illawarra played those 2 games, one at home, then they go down to Melbourne. Teams do it all the time. New Zealand travels more miles than anyone, I would say. Cairns probably right up there as well. So everyone's traveling. So no one wants to hear that, firstly. But then I don't know how it actually does impact the team in terms of the preparation. And if they do start to have these rounds where they have one game, that's the organization. But the one thing that I would say with this Sydney team that we haven't seen all year has been really consistency with the rotation. And I think that's because Gorge has been searching for something. But I did like this starting lineup. You have Sean Bruce in there. You have Cam Oliver in there. Then you have Cooks, Adams, and Bull Qual. just leave it. I think that's the best starting lineup to have. I know Alex Tui, you can make a case that he could be in there. And if I was going to bring him in, I'd bring him in for Bull Qual because I think Qual has been at a pretty disappointing season, to be honest. But I keep this 5, play those guys. And I think we saw down the stretch late in this game, the Stars, which is why we believe that Sydney can do stuff this year. The Stars had big plays. I'll get to Jalen Adams, but he hit 2 threes. He hit 2 big threes in this game. Cam Oliver was starting to feel himself late in this game, and he had a couple of jump shots. He had one bucket where he got to the paint and was able to score. So their Stars were taking over, and there's been so many times where it felt like the Stars haven't been on the floor for this team as they're searching for who has the hot hand on a night. So just from a rotation standpoint, even though the game didn't necessarily start well, I like that rotation that they kept with it throughout this game, and I think that's the ceiling for this team. Best players on the floor at the end of the game with the ball in their hands. Now, you can bring up the Jalen Adams late game situation if you want.
So I will. I'll get to that. The rotational stuff is still super confusing to me. Changing the swings that we're going through, it's just sort of baffling, I think. And again, I said this a few weeks ago. Gorge sees it too. There was a point where Sean Bruce was about to check in, and Gorge just waved him back and brought Tyler Robertson over. It still seems like it just seems like they sub for fun. Like they're bored and they just need to sub someone in for no apparent reason. There was a point in that game against the Taipans where Cam Oliver had a really good start to that game. He was really effective on both ends, I think. And there was like a 6 or 7 minute stretch in the second quarter where I got a text from someone saying, "Hey, is Cam Oliver injured?" And I'm like, "Oh my God, where's Cam Oliver?" He was just on the bench. I sincerely think they just forgot to put him in. Like he obviously should have been on the floor earlier than they eventually put him in at the end of that second quarter. So that sort of stuff just confused me. The Alex Tui thing, him coming off the bench, I don't care who starts, but to play him 6 minutes in that game, where he's 6 minutes, we're real positive. And then obviously he was really, really impressive in that game against United. Almost single-handedly willed their team back in the third quarter. The swings is what confuses me. I understand if you want to bench Alex Tui, maybe you can get more out of him, but don't play him 6 minutes. That sort of stuff confuses me, and it just seems like I don't understand the reasoning behind it. So that's that aside. Jalen Adams, that last play. The Kings know this, that whatever Jalen Adams brings from a talent perspective, and he is so talented. We saw the shot making down the stretch of both games this round, especially this game against United. The threes that he hit were so impressive. I saw it in person against the Southeast Melbourne Phoenix a few weeks ago. His shot making is incredible. He is an unbelievably talented basketball player, but he comes with a coolness. He just has this relaxed, chilled nature. And it's not malicious. It's not mean-spirited. He comes from a really, really good place. But that's just his nature. He's just a really chilled guy. And in this instance, that can't happen. The fact that so for those who didn't see it, the Sydney Kings got a stop. There was, 25 some odd seconds left on the clock. The score was tied. He had an opportunity to bring the ball down the floor, potentially get a bucket, put his Kings up. Dribbling down, he's meandering up the floor. Gorge called him over to tell him what he was going to run. The annoying thing is that Gorge just told him, "Hey, we're going to run C5," which if we've covered Gorge for years. C5 is just a middle ball screen. Like this isn't some crazy play that this guy's going to run. And in their little back and forth, their conversation, Jalen Adams is still sauntering up the floor. 8-second violation. So it turns the ball over. And then he was also the person that committed, I think, an unneeded foul on Shea Illy that sent him to the line. He split free throws. United went on to win that game. But these are like the marginal things, the very controllable things that the Sydney Kings are doing that's losing them games. I think it's some rotational things that they can fix. I think it's just being a bit too relaxed. We've seen some late turnovers from this team over the course of this season just because they're a little bit too chill. I think just the nature of these guys is that they're very cool. But in order to win these games, especially against a team like United, who will absolutely take advantage if you make one single small mistake, you can't be this cool. You have to lock in. You have to fix those marginal things if you want to be a championship team.
All right, I'm going to hit up I was very distracted while you were talking then. I was looking at my phone and I was taking a note because I need the social team. You said Jalen Adams is a chill guy, so we need to do the meme. When you need to get the ball over half court in under 8 seconds, but you don't get it done because you're a chill guy. And Jalen Adams with the chill guy meme. You can't be angry at him. He's just a chill guy, Olgun.
But you could be upset at that circumstance.
You can't be upset at the chill guy. That's the whole point of it.
Yeah, but look, that's why you love him too, right? Because he comes across this way, and again, he's so talented. But again, those marginal things that win you big games, you've got to clean that stuff up. That can't happen again.
Yeah, no, you are bang on. It's if you're a Kings fan, that is a moment where you're just absolutely losing your mind because it's such a great fight back, and it is inexcusable. And I can laugh about it because I was like, I found it humorous. I'm like, what's the hell?
It's not us. We're not affected by this.
No, so but yeah, I felt for Kings fans and for him a little bit in that moment as well because he had such a good few minutes before that. Last note I had from this game, we don't talk about him enough, but hat tip to Jack White. He is so much more than this, but he plays the role of a garbage man on this team. He just cleans the glass. He finishes plays. And then now we've seen it on multiple occasions, 2 or 3 times, where it gets late in the game and you need a bucket and he'll knock down the clutch bucket as well. He had a big 3 late in his game. The game was still tight. The game was still on the line. But he's having a massive season in a role that you watch him and you still feel like he could give you so much more. He could get more shots. He could get more touches. He doesn't really do it. He plays a garbage man role for this team and he does it at an all-world level. And he was in this matchup again that we love to watch with Xavier Cooks. He was outstanding. He's having a great year.
Yeah, he is, I think, a star-level player who has the humility to be your best role player if you need him to. And with the way Chris Goulding is playing right now, the way Shea Illy is playing, especially in this game, the fact that he had the humility to step back and say, all right, I just need to do 1, 2, 3 things really, really well. And those things are really important. Rebounding the ball, being a connector, just the general defense. Xavier Cooks had a really, really slow night. This wasn't a big night from Xavier Cooks. He's been a little bit iffy lately, but
yeah,
big part of that is Jack White just bringing that extra energy and that extra hustle on both ends. He's been so good for this team. He's 6'6". He leads the league in rebounding. And that 3 in the corner was reminiscent of the last time these two teams played. It looked like the exact same shot. That ball whipped over to him in the corner. No hesitation, gets that up. I'd like to see him shoot more threes. I want to see him get 4 or 5 threes up a game. This wasn't the game for that. It didn't look like he had the opportunity to do that sort of stuff. But hats off to him. Hat off to him for, again, having the humility to step back and be the best role player in the league, even though he has the capacity to be a star.
Melbourne United does this better than any team in the league. They consistently have star-level players come in and play within the team system. So shout out to Melbourne United and Dean Vickerman. He's been doing it for a long time, and he's doing it again for this team that looks pretty comfortable on top of the ladder. Another game I thought was interesting, and there was multiple reasons why I thought it was fascinating, but Adelaide, Tasmania get the win here, a much-needed win for them. It is interesting with this team, though, because as soon as I saw the starting lineups, and I know Adelaide went deep into the rotation early in this game, but I was just looking at the starters for this team. I was like, I know that Montrez and Kendrick Davis have been big parts of this team, but they've still got talent on the roster. And when you've got DJ Vasiljevic and then Jarrell Martin comes in and Isaac Humphries, that's a damn good top 3 players. And then Jason Kadee, we know he's had a nice season, and Sunday Dech. Versus the Tassie starting lineup with no Jordan Crawford there. So it's Doyle, Magnay, McDonald, Steindl, Tarangi. I mean, Adelaide still have a pretty powerful starting 5. There was a few factors that I thought were interesting. First of all, DJ Vasiljevic is injured, and I don't know what that looks like this week for him in terms of playing. They said it was a corky in the game broadcast. We know that often can reveal itself as more in the days after. I'm not sure if you got anything there, but I would say there has to be a question mark on him playing this week.
Ask him tomorrow. You have him tomorrow. Or on Thursday for Nothing But Aussie Hoops. Ask him. You don't need to rely on me for everything, right? You can go to the source.
I'm not the news guy, man. That's your job. I just sit here and ask you a few things.
Ask DJ.
So this Adelaide game.
What, DJ's reticent to talk ever? No, like DJ will tell you.
He's a pretty straight up guy. I might have an inkling. That's all I'm saying. So I might have an inkling, but we'll find it.
Think of this Adelaide game.
Nothing but net Aussie Hoops. Check it out Thursday night. It might be a news bomb after the Olgun segment on that game. Yeah, I thought Tassie in general, we've seen it now a couple of games, but they look organized with Sean McDonald. He's not a star in the league, but he doesn't really make too many mistakes. Another bizarre game where Milton Doyle didn't seem like he wanted to take a shot in the first half. And ultimately, a Tassie team that was able to play a game the way that they wanted to play. It doesn't matter how depleted the opposition team is, they still want to beat you 80-75, and they still want to slow it down, and they want to make it a grind. They were able to do that. And for Adelaide, the two things that really stand out, first of all, DJ looked like he was hurt, and I don't know whether it impacted his ability to shoot the ball, but the shot selection we know is just not that good at times. And there was times late in this game where the shot selection was poor, and they needed a bucket, and they had a chance to win the game. And then the other part of this, Jarrell Martin just doesn't look ready to play. And he has been a guy that's been a star in the past, but that's not the guy that we thought Adelaide were getting. And I know in the broadcast they were talking about the team not putting him in positions to succeed, but he's got to own some of that as well. I know he fouled out, but he only played 19 minutes. When you got the other two guys out, he's got to be in a position where he can play 25 to 30, and I don't know whether he's capable right now.
Yeah, the problem is this is the guy that we knew we were getting. Every other team in the league knew this, that Jarrell Martin probably wouldn't be ready to give you legitimate minutes until Christmas.
Well, he was also hurt as well. We do know
but that's the point. That's the point, though. He was coming off a really significant injury, and then he had an injury on top of that. So it feels maybe feels unfair to criticize him because he's not ready to give you those sorts of minutes.
He's been back for a while, man. He's been back for a while.
Yeah, he's not in shape though. Like, and it's just, and if he has to be your first import, man, like that's not going to cut it. And that's just by happenstance. He has to be their first import right now because Kendrick and Montrez are gone. But I think this whole thing points to the thing that we pointed to with Adelaide to start the season, which is their depth. They're just not a deep team by any means. So Jason Kadee having to play bulk minutes at the one, like, again, you're probably not going to win games consistently if that's going to happen. I don't know where you're making up the 50 some odd points that you get from Kendrick and Montrez. They got 19 points on 12 shots from Isaac Humphries. I thought he was as good as he's been all season, just because I think it was more of a focal point. But you're not going to win games when DJ is 5 of 21 from the field. That's not going to happen. And respectfully, you're not going to win games if you have to go so deep into your bench that you're playing a Keanu Rasmussen or even playing Ben Christie considerable minutes. You're just not going to win games in the NBL if that's the case. Even if it's against this Tasmania Jack Jumpers team, which has been good lately, but over the course of the season hasn't been amazing, especially offensively. If you're just matching up these guys, Keanu Rasmussen up against like a Milton Doyle or a Ben Christie up against Will Magnay, you're never going to win those matchups. And that's across the league too. Brisbane, throwing, Tristan Devers on in the third quarter, respectfully to Devers, who I think can be a really cool player one day, you're just not going to win games right now if that's the case. But Adelaide had no choice. This is just what their roster dictates. They have Ben Christie and Jacob Rigoni as their sort of 11th, their 10th and 11th guy. And going into the season, that was one of the question marks, which is can you just have no minutes guys sit on the end of your roster? Because injuries are inevitable. Suspensions, maybe not so much, but that there's going to be opportunities for these guys because injuries will happen. Some of your stars will miss time. Having just those sorts of guys on the end of your roster, think of Sydney. Who's like the 10, 11, 12 on their roster? It's McQuatch, Malwatch, it's Kelly Pepe, it's Tyler Robertson. There is a difference between the levels of the end of these benches, and I think it showed Adelaide.
Yeah, it's hard when you're going to play three of them on the floor at the same time. So you can probably get away with it, with one guy and then some of your stars. But yeah, in that first quarter there, they had a lineup there that I just would have assumed they never would have to run unless it was late in the blowout or something like that. So I think this weekend is going to be challenging again. We discussed it, whether it's Perth and Brisbane. Obviously, Kendrick Davis only has one more game to go. We'll wait and see what happens with DJ Vasiljevic. But if I asked you what is the biggest travesty of an individual moment in the entire NBL 25 season, what would be your immediate answer?
I've got it. It is whoever the referee was on the baseline who called this foul on Will Magnay on what would have been the block of the season. He did have a block against Montrezl Harrell earlier in the season, which was of a similar vein, which was of catching the block. But this one was just demoralizing. It was Jarrell Martin not getting close to as high as Will Magnay, because obviously. And Will Magnay goes up one hand, the left hand as well, pulls that thing down. And credit to him for not appealing more and not getting more angry about that, because that was as clean as blocks get. But that ref on the baseline, you got just that's got to be a 2-week suspension for that guy. You go sit with Kendrick Davis and Montrez on the sidelines for a little bit, because that can't happen. That was one of the plays of the season. We just be robbed of it.
Justice for Will Magnay. That was an unbelievable play. And I don't know which of these officials it was, and I don't know whether about a minute later whether it was the same official. But then you doubled down and you called a foul on Craig Sword for the clean strip. I don't know what the hell was going on, but these were two beautiful defensive plays, and these refs absolutely lost their minds down the stretch of this game. And if Tassie had lost this game, they should have protested and taken it to court, because that was a joke. And I would say they should have taken it to court. And I would say this Will Magnay block still should be in every top 10 list. I will tell our people at ESPN here for our shows, Olgun, make sure that Magnay block gets in there, because it's a joke.
Just flip it with some different commentary, and you'll be good. But yeah, that stuff annoys me. The officiating, I thought it was like fines and stuff. We love the season. We weren't talking about it much, but I think more and more over the past couple of weeks we're talking about it. I don't know. It's because we go from watching FIBA basketball to NBL basketball again, and I think there's an obvious difference between the two. But it feels like we're talking about it a little bit more, and that I don't like going down this road.
So it's interesting. After last week or the week before's podcast, when we discussed Josh King and his welcome to the NBL moments, there was someone very angry about, so I don't know, I was on somewhere on social media that, we should be more serious, and we shouldn't be laughing at that and saying welcome. We should be talking about the disgrace that was the officiating. We were laughing at the fact that every new coach comes to the league that does the same thing. It was nuts.
That was empathy. We empathize with Josh.
Yes.
We are in this boat too. We have to live with these refs. And if he wanted to be part of this league, then welcome aboard, Mr. Kim,
right.
and enjoy it. And he got a very early tee in that game against the Illawarra Hawks. And shout out, I know we can't talk about every team all the time. Shout out to Owen Foxwell, who's really, really good in that game against the Illawarra Hawks. That was a really big win for that team. You have to pick up those home wins against good teams before the Australian Open break that they go on. Credit to Owen Foxwell. Credit to Josh King for, benching Derek Walton Jr. That's a very ballsy thing to do. Benching your best player for Owen Foxwell, who's performing really, really well. That's a tough thing to do. So credit to him for that. They got the win. Good on him.
7 minutes for Walton Jr. Let's set aside some time next week, because I want to watch this Phoenix team a little bit more. Let's set aside some time on next week's podcast to get to them. That was a big win, and they were multiple times down by double digits, and they would continue to fight. Still some obvious question marks there. And I'll spare a thought for Owen Foxwell, who legitimately, single-handedly changed the course of this game in the first quarter with his ability to push the tempo, dive on the floor, get to the rack. He did everything against a really high-quality opposition guard unit. So Foxwell was outstanding, and he would have gone to sleep on Saturday night and thinking, oh, man, this is the best little man performance of the weekend. And then Sunday you had PJC and Bryce Cotton, so it's a bit of a set. But he had 22 points. It was awesome.
And speaking of Bryce Cotton overshadowing you, pour one out for James Bateman, who had his record as the highest scorer in a single game in the modern 40-minute era in the NBL for 14 days before Bryce Cotton stepped in. And I think, I don't know if this is an unpopular take, it makes me feel a little bit better that it is Bryce Cotton at the top of that list, as opposed to someone who is, a first-year import who, for all we know, may have just been on a singular game heater, whereas Bryce Cotton is someone who has shown that he is at this level game in and game out. So it is nice that it is Bryce Cotton. In the same way that it was nice that it was Chris Goulding at the top of that list, because he's one of the best we've seen in this league. Same with Bryce Cotton. He's maybe the best we've seen in this league. I'm not going to go in that conversation. He's a top 3, top 5 NBL player of all time. It is good that he is at the top of that list.
NBL legends, I'll buy into that. I don't think that's a bad take there.
Sure.
I want to wrap this up just quickly with Illawarra. So obviously they blow out New Zealand. They just continue to frustrate me because, I like this team a lot. And I think they're really good. And I'm actually less concerned about this team the better the opposition. But it just didn't surprise me that this team got up double digits twice and then blew it against a Phoenix team that I'm not sure is any good. And there are certain things, whether it's the defense, like, yes, Foxwell was awesome, but put some effort in to stop him in transition, please. Like, stop letting him beat 3 guys up the floor time and time again. Sometimes they just decide that, we're not going to bother rebounding anymore, and they'll give up key rebounds for second opportunities. And then down the stretch in this game, Tyler Harvey has 19 points on only 10 shots for the game. He had 10 points between the 5:52 mark and the 2:46 mark in the fourth quarter. 10 points. he was on an absolute heater. He didn't have another shot for the rest of the game. Like, how does that happen? Why on the next possession is Trey Kell taking a step back three? Get the ball back to Tyler Harvey. Now, I know that he did have that turnover late in the game. It was a little bit of a broken play there. But get the ball back to him. And then I also didn't understand. I mean, I know what they were trying to do, but there's only 2.7 seconds on the clock. And you have Tyler Harvey inbound the ball. Now, I know that they were going to try and get it right back to him, but it's only 2.7 seconds. I don't know whether you've got enough time, if there is even the slightest denial, just get the ball to him off the inbound and let him shoot it from 5 feet beyond the three-point line, because we've seen him do it, and I think that's your best chance to win. So I just didn't understand why this happened.
Yeah, I agree. We saw it twice in Melbourne, where 2 or 3 seconds on the clock, a team down 3, need a three-pointer. Tyler Harvey inbounding the ball, weird. The Sydney Kings had this situation too. You have bigs who can shoot. Think of guys who are actually going to get this shot off, right? If it's someone like Tyler Harvey, he's going to get on the floor. He's 6'1", 6'2". He's going to get crowded. It's going to be a tough look. Darius Days is there. If you're the Sydney Kings, Cam Oliver is there. Quatnoy is there. You have Alex Du is there. You have bigs who can shoot that ball. Throw it into those guys, because you know that they're going to get a better look than some of the smaller guys, probably, considering how that was going to be defended. It's just inconsistency with the Illawarra Hawks when it comes to. It still feels like they're figuring some stuff out. Now, they put Mason Peatling in the starting lineup. I think that was a good move, but because again, he was great in both games. He was a plus 15 in that 3-point loss to the Phoenix. They're still trying to figure out how to make their guys most effective, how to maximize everyone. So they're trying to figure out how to maximize Darius Days. It's been a bit up and down. He was largely good in that game against the Phoenix. Him coming off the bench, maybe they found something there. Trey Kell has been largely solid, as a creator, as someone who initiates. But at the end of that game, it's sort of just knowing, time and place and personnel, and understanding that Tyler Harvey is shooting it really well, and you know that he's feeling it. Get him the ball. So it's just small things like that. That's where this team has some continuity in a lot of their bench, and it's Tyler Harvey and Sam Froling, but not as much with those new imports. So it's just figuring out the places in which they're going to be most effective. Again, that's stuff that you find in time. I think Justin Tatum is one of the coaches in the league I trust to, pinpoint what those issues are and remedy them. He's already done one pretty substantial move in bringing Darius Days off the bench. I think that will be something that's going to be a consistent thing. I think he'll figure out the other part of this too, which is, down the stretch, where the ball goes to, how to make sure they get consistent scoring. They've been a really, really good offensive team. I think they'll figure that out. Again, I agree. Consistency over the course of a 40-minute game, they haven't found that yet.
You just don't want to let too many games slip. And again, I think they should be beating the Phoenix at home, even though the Phoenix have turned it around. They've won a few games over the last few weeks, but they're 8-5 now. You would have been 9-4. They're second on the ladder, so they're in a great spot. But that win really would have created that separation between the rest of the pack. Now they're just 1 or 2 slip-ups from really dropping back down there, and I think they're better than that. So we'll see if the Illawarra Hawks can find that consistency. Let's wrap it up there. Another round coming up this week. Some fascinating matchups along the way. You can watch it all on ESPN. Olgun, outstanding from you today. Great to see you.
Thank you. It's good to see you. I'm doing a bit of a road trip coming up. I'm getting to Melbourne for a bit, going up to Brisbane for a bit. So I'm gonna get some of these other arenas in. Get back to John Cain Arena for a bit, see the Brisbane Entertainment Centre for the first time. Haven't been there before ever. So I'm excited. Nice.
That sounds very well. Keep us up to date with that one. Where to find this podcast every single Tuesday, and all the news at espn.com.au. I'm Kane Pittman. He's Olgun Ulich, and we'll see you all next week on the ESPN Aussie Hoops Hour podcast.